We're going to be seeing what happens when you put baking soda, vinegar, all wrapped up in a piece of paper. What happens when they mix? So the goal of this is to get your rocket to launch after 10 seconds, which means you have to control the reactants and how much of them you put into your canister to get them so that they don't go off too early, but also so they don't go off too late. So my original hypothesis and thought to this was that if you put 0.40 grams of baking soda, 15 milliliters of vinegar, and then you put the baking soda into one piece of paper, it would probably go off in about 10 seconds.
Oh my gosh!
So we know the things that affect the rate of a chemical reaction is the mass, the concentration of a reaction, the temperature of the substance, and the presence or absence of a catalyst. So I went off of mostly mass and the concentration of a reactant. We used baking soda in a piece of toilet paper because it compacts it more, and so it's not just throwing it out in a thin layer. We also used 0.4 because just previous tests had shown around there was going to be the best results. Okay, so the equation for baking soda and vinegar being mixed, or more scientifically known as acetic acid and sodium hydrogen carbonate, is NaHCO3 plus CH3COOH, all turning into CO2 plus H2O plus CH3COONA. Now, one of the things that I already knew going into this was that when you mix baking soda and vinegar, you get an explosive type reaction. This is due to the expanding gases when the two solutions mix, and the reason this makes this thing a rocket is because when you have it and you put them in and you set it on its top, this lid, it's against the ground. It has nowhere it can go. So when this gas suddenly expands in here, it pushes all of that down, launching the bottom off and shooting it straight up. Some variables that would affect the amount of time that it took for the rocket to launch that we took into consideration are the amount of baking soda we used, the amount of vinegar we used, the amount of toilet paper we used, whether it be 1 sheet or 2 sheet, and then we ended up changing the size of the sheet, so we made sure that it stayed consistent so that each test would be roughly as close as possible to each other. So our group started off using 0.4 grams of baking soda. We also used 15 milliliters of vinegar. Then we put the baking soda into 1 sheet of toilet paper, just one. And then once we did that, we would take the baking soda, which would be right in the center. So this test did not go very well. Our first launch time was 2.3 seconds. Our second time took so long that we actually ended up having to go and pop it ourselves. And the third time took 6.37 seconds, and we changed the amount of baking soda that we used. So rather than using 0.4 grams, we used 0.35 grams of baking soda. So we did the exact same thing. Now our first test got 22.35 seconds. Our second test ended up getting 15.7 seconds, which was actually getting closer. And then our third test took 19.1 seconds. Now, these were all fine times, but not close to what we needed it. But that just meant, well, we need to change one more thing. And we knew that making the baking soda change actually had a large effect on the amount of time. So we went back inside, and we tried 0.37 grams of baking soda. So we did the same thing, put it in. For our third improvement, we decided that we knew that baking soda And changing the amount of baking soda that we were using had a good effect on the times that we had. And we changed the amount of baking soda that we used again. So this time we took our baking soda, we put 0.37, measured it out, 0.37 grams of baking soda into the middle of one piece of toilet paper. The times on these were not terrible, but they were also not quite where we wanted them. We were running between 15 and 17 seconds. So we knew we had to drop it just a little bit more. Maybe this amount of baking soda was good and we needed to change something else. So what we actually ended up changing was the amount of toilet paper that we used. Rather than using just one piece of toilet paper, we used two. We stacked them on top of each other like this. We put our baking soda right into the middle. We figured it's a little thicker, which means it should hold the reaction in a different way. So these times were actually pretty good. We got 10.11 seconds, 18.32 seconds, and 9.4 seconds. Now this was right where we wanted to be. The only problem was it was a little inconsistent. Now that was what we determined in the end was due to the inconsistency of the toilet paper. Not each piece was the same size, and also not each piece was the same thickness. So we decided to try it again, except this time what we do is when we had our toilet paper, we would take our two pieces, rip them apart, but this time we'd measure them. And each time we did it, we'd measure them to the exact same length to make sure that it was the same every time. So what we did is we made it 3 inches by 3 inches. Now we did the same for the other piece, which meant that each test that we did would result in roughly the same because we weren't having these variables in the size of the toilet paper. And we got much better times. We got about 10, 9.3, a 11. In the final project, we had to do 3 different tests and take the average. What was our final product? So, first what we did, we cut down our 2 pieces of toilet paper into 3 by 3 squares to get that consistency. Next what we did, we put on our baking soda, exactly 0.37 grams. So, then what we did, we take our film canister, then we put in our measured out 15 milliliters of vinegar. We kept that the same the whole time, drop it in, shut it, turn it over, shake it twice. One thing that went wrong was I think our consistency. Now our first time was 29.09 and this was nowhere near where we wanted to be. And I personally put it down to the number of shakes that we did. Now, I think one of the problems was we started actually up too high so that it took longer when we shook it to bring it down onto the launch pad because the second it went down is when the time started. Also, I think the number of shakes just changes. We know that. So, one problem we had was the first time, I think we just didn't shake it quite as hard or as many times as we quite needed to. So we put it down, we got our 29.09. Now, I remembered this has to be an average. So, we didn't quite want an exact 10 because that would make our average actually too high. So I realized what we need to do is get our average down. So, rather than attempting for consistency that we had before, we decided we wanted to make it go off as fast as possible. And it went off in 3.53 seconds. So that actually brought our average down a lot. This was good. We needed around an 8. So what we wanted to do was get those consistent results we had had the whole time. So we did what we always did, which was you take it, you take your 2 pieces of toilet paper and your baking soda inside, your vinegar. Everything's the same. You drop it in, you shut it. Now 2 shakes, almost exactly how we were doing it each time. Set it down, we ended up getting a 7.93. Now this brought our average out to 13.52. Now this wasn't quite where we wanted it, but it wasn't as bad as we thought we were gonna do. Everybody else had to pick their best 2 times. Now that actually worked in our favor, as we chose 29.09 and 3.53, and then when you take the average of that, it's actually 10.87. So that's actually a very good time, and it's the kind of thing we really wanted. Okay, so in the end, we didn't do quite as well as we wanted to, but I think that just came down to the fact that our rocket depended on the shakes, which can be messed up a lot by human error. It means we needed to rely on things that couldn't be changed as easily by human error. So maybe not rely so heavily on the amount of shakes, but maybe on the amount of vinegar or the amount of baking soda that we used. So in the end, my hypothesis was close. I had guessed that it would be 0.4 grams of baking soda and 1 piece of toilet paper with 15 milliliters of vinegar. Now in the end, it was still 15 milliliters of vinegar. It was just 2 pieces of toilet paper cut down to keep the consistency 3 by 3, and then 0.37 grams of baking soda. So I was actually very close with my hypothesis, and I think overall this was a very good test.